Corporal Jack Morrison of the 1st Battalion, 23rd Marines crouched in the black volcanic sand of Iwo Jima on February 20, 1945, the second day of what would become one of the bloodiest battles in Marine Corps history. 50 yards ahead, a concrete pillbox sat silent and menacing, its firing ports dark, waiting. Behind Morrison, 3 Marines lay dead, cut down by machine gun fire when they'd tried to advance across the open ground. To his left, Sergeant Tom Briggs was bleeding from shrapnel wounds, but still conscious, still fighting. "We can't take that position with rifles," Briggs said through gritted teeth. "We've tried 3 times. Lost 12 men. That pillbox is reinforced concrete. Our grenades just bounce off. We need demo charges, but nobody can get close enough to place them." Morrison knew Briggs was right. The Japanese had spent 2 years fortifying Iwo Jima, turning the 8-square-mile volcanic island into the most heavily defended piece of real estate in the Pacific. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, commanding the 21,000 Japanese defenders, had created a defense in depth unlike anything the Marines had encountered before. No more banzai charges, no more suicidal counterattacks, just carefully prepared positions, interlocking fields of fire, and a determination to make the Americans pay in blood for every yard of black sand. The pillbox Morrison was facing was typical of Kuribayashi's engineering genius. Walls 3 feet thick, reinforced with steel rails from the island's railroad, positioned to cover the approaches to Mount Suribachi with machine gun and mortar fire. American pre-invasion bombardment, 3 days of naval gunfire and airstrikes, had barely scratched it. "What about the Flamethrower team?" Morrison asked. "Where are they?" "Coming up now," Briggs replied, nodding toward the rear. "New guys. Haven't seen them in action yet." Private First Class Jimmy Chen and Private Robert Bobby Williams moved forward in a crouch, Chen carrying the M22 flamethrower, a metal tank assembly strapped to his back, connected to a handheld nozzle and igniter. Williams carried extra fuel canisters and a Thompson submachine gun for protection. Both men were 20 years old, had landed on the beach yesterday morning, and were about to use their weapon in combat for the first time. The M22 flamethrower was a relatively new weapon in the Marine arsenal, though flamethrowers themselves dated back to World War I. What made the M22 different, what made it the weapon Japanese defenders would come to fear above all others, was its improved range, reliability, and most importantly, its tactical integration into Marine infantry doctrine. By early 1945, every Marine battalion had dedicated flamethrower teams, specially trained in the weapon's use and in the tactics that made it devastatingly effective against fortified positions. "You, Chen?" Morrison asked as the 2 privates reached his position. "Yes, Corporal." "Private Chen, this is Williams. He's my assistant. You know how to use that thing?" "Trained at Camp Pendleton for 6 weeks, sir. Practiced on mock-ups of Japanese fortifications. We know what we're doing." Morrison studied Chen's face, seeing fear there, but also determination. The flamethrower was the most dangerous job in the infantry. The tank on your back was essentially a bomb, and Japanese soldiers learned quickly to target flamethrower operators first. But Chen and Williams had volunteered for this duty, understanding the weapon's importance and the difference it could make. "That pillbox has killed 12 of my men," Morrison explained. "It's got at least 1 machine gun, probably a mortar team too. Walls are too thick for grenades, and we can't get close enough with satchel charges." "Can you burn them out?" Chen nodded, his jaw set. "That's what we're here for, Corporal. But we'll need covering fire. Japanese know to shoot the flamethrower first. If they hit my tank, we all go up. You'll have covering fire." "Briggs, get everyone ready. When Chen moves, I want every rifle and bar we've got putting rounds through those firing ports. Don't give them time to aim." The tactic they were about to employ had been developed through bitter experience in places like Tarawa, Saipan, and Peleliu. Flamethrowers were devastating against bunkers and pillboxes, but only if they could get close enough to use them. The key was suppressive fire, keeping the defenders' heads down long enough for the flamethrower team to reach effective range, which was about 40 yards for the M22. Chen checked his equipment one final time. The flamethrower held 4 gallons of fuel, a mixture of gasoline and diesel thickened with napalm powder to make it sticky and burn longer. The tank assembly weighed about 68 pounds fully loaded, making movement difficult but not impossible. The igniter was electric, powered by batteries, and when it worked properly, it would produce a stream of burning fuel that could reach temperatures of 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. "Ready when you are?" "Corporal," Chen said. Morrison looked at Briggs, who nodded and began organizing the covering fire. 20 Marines armed with M1 rifles and 3 Browning automatic rifles positioned themselves to shoot at the pillbox. Their job wasn't necessarily to kill the defenders. The concrete was too thick for that, but to make them keep their heads down, to suppress their fire long enough for Chen to work. "On my signal," Morrison said. 3, 2, 1, fire. 20 rifles opened up simultaneously, rounds hammering into the pillbox, ricocheting off concrete, some finding the firing ports and whining into the darkness inside. Chen and Williams sprinted forward in a crouch, covering the 50 yards in seconds that felt like hours, their boots digging into volcanic sand that shifted and slid beneath them. At 40 yards, Chen went prone and aimed the flamethrower nozzle at the pillbox's main firing port. His hands were steady despite his racing heart, despite knowing that if a Japanese bullet hit his fuel tank in the next few seconds, he'd die in an explosion of burning gasoline. He squeezed the trigger. What happened next was something the Japanese defenders had never experienced and would never forget, those who survived to remember it. A stream of burning napalm shot from the nozzle, arcing through the air like liquid fire, splashing against the concrete around the firing port, and then finding the opening, pouring inside like a flaming river seeking its course. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Napalm doesn't just burn, it consumes oxygen, filling enclosed spaces with fire and smoke, creating temperatures that make steel glow red and concrete crack. The machine gun in the pillbox fell silent within seconds as the crew was either killed by the flames or driven back deeper into the fortification, gasping for air that had been replaced by superheated smoke. Chen held the trigger for 10 seconds, the length of time he'd been trained to use for maximum effect without wasting fuel. When he released it, the pillbox was transformed. Flames licked from every opening, black smoke poured out, and the concrete itself was blackened and cracked from the intense heat. "Secondary port," Williams shouted, pointing to another firing position 20 yards to the left. "They've got another position connected to the first." This was Kuribayashi's defensive genius. Interconnected positions, so that if one was knocked out, defenders could retreat through tunnels to another position and continue fighting. But Chen had fuel left, and Williams had already spotted the threat. They moved to a new position, still under covering fire from Morrison's squad, and Chen sent another stream of burning napalm into the secondary pillbox. This time, Japanese soldiers emerged from a hidden exit, preferring to face American rifles rather than burn alive. 3 were cut down immediately by Marine fire. 2 more emerged with their clothes on fire, screaming, collapsing in the black sand. The entire engagement had lasted less than 3 minutes. 2 interconnected Japanese positions that had held up an entire Marine platoon for hours, that had killed 12 men and wounded 20 more, had been neutralized by 2 privates with a flamethrower. "Cease fire," Morrison ordered. He waited 30 seconds, watching for any sign of movement from either pillbox. Nothing. Just smoke and the crackle of flames consuming whatever flammable material had been inside. Chen, Williams, fall back. "Good work." As the 2 flamethrower operators returned to the Marine lines, Chen was shaking, not from fear exactly, but from the aftermath of adrenaline, from having survived, from having killed men in one of the most horrible ways imaginable, and knowing he'd have to do it again, probably many times before Iwo Jima was taken. "First time?" Morrison asked when they reached his position. "Yes, Corporal. You did well. Saved a lot of Marines today. That's what that weapon does. It saves our lives by taking theirs in the worst way possible. Never forget that. We didn't start this war, but we're going to end it. One pillbox at a time if we have to." What Morrison didn't say, what he was thinking but couldn't quite articulate, was that the flamethrower represented something new in warfare, something that changed the psychological calculus of combat. Japanese soldiers had proven willing to fight to the death in their fortifications, had shown that they would not surrender, would not retreat, would hold their positions until killed. But the flamethrower offered something worse than death. Something that even the most fanatical defender feared. Burning alive in a concrete box, unable to escape, unable to fight back, dying in agony as fire consumed the air itself. By the end of the second day on Iwo Jima, word was spreading through Japanese defensive positions about the American fire weapons. Survivors described streams of liquid fire that poured through openings, that stuck to everything it touched, that turned bunkers into ovens. Some Japanese soldiers began to fear the flamethrowers more than artillery, more than tanks, more than the naval gunfire that had pounded their island for days. And that fear would begin to change the nature of the battle. The flamethrowers' impact on Iwo Jima was not immediately obvious to Marine commanders, but by the fourth day of the battle, patterns were emerging that suggested the weapon was having effects beyond its direct tactical use. Captain Richard Mahoney, commanding Baker Company, 1st Battalion, 23rd Marines, noticed it first during an after-action briefing. The Japanese are changing their defensive tactics, Mahoney told his platoon leaders. We've been encountering more surface positions and fewer sealed bunkers. Intelligence thinks they're adapting to our flamethrower tactics. They'd rather risk our rifles and grenades than be burned alive underground. This was exactly what was happening, though the Marines wouldn't fully understand it until after the battle. General Kuribayashi's defensive plan had called for his troops to remain in their fortified positions until killed, to inflict maximum casualties without wasting men on counterattacks. But the flamethrower was breaking the psychological foundation of that plan. Japanese soldiers, even those fanatically loyal, were beginning to make tactical decisions that prioritized avoiding the flamethrowers over following Kuribayashi's directives. Lieutenant James Bradford, a Marine intelligence officer who interrogated one of the few Japanese prisoners taken during the battle, heard this firsthand. He said the soldiers called the flamethrowers devil weapons, said they'd rather die fighting in the open than wait in a bunker for the fire to come. One of his officers had been burned, not killed, but burned badly, and the screaming had demoralized everyone who heard it. After that, men started abandoning prepared positions when they heard flamethrowers were approaching. But the flamethrowers' effectiveness came at a terrible cost to the men who carried them. By the end of the first week, Chen and Williams were among the few surviving members of their original flamethrower team. Their weapon had been so effective that they were in constant demand, called forward to reduce fortifications across the Marine advance. In 7 days, Chen had fired his flamethrower 43 times, had been wounded twice by shrapnel, and had watched 3 other flamethrower operators in his unit die when Japanese fire ignited their fuel tanks. "I dream about it," Chen admitted to a chaplain during a rare rest period. "Not about the Japanese I've killed, though I dream about them too. I dream about burning, about my tank getting hit, about being trapped in fire. Every time I strap on that tank, I know there's a good chance I won't walk away if someone hits it. But if I don't use it, other Marines die trying to take positions I could have burned out in seconds." The chaplain, Captain Michael O'Sullivan, had heard similar confessions from other flamethrower operators. "You're doing God's work," he told Chen, though privately O'Sullivan struggled with the theological implications of a weapon that killed through burning. "You're saving your brothers. That's what matters." The tactical integration of flamethrowers into Marine infantry operations had evolved significantly since their first use in the Pacific. Early in the war, flamethrowers had been used almost as novelty weapons, brought forward when convenient, but not central to tactical planning. By Iwo Jima, they were essential components of combined arms tactics. The standard approach, refined through months of island warfare, involved 4 elements. First, reconnaissance to identify the fortification's type, firing ports, and potential exits. Second, suppressive fire from rifles and machine guns to keep defenders from effectively engaging the flamethrower team. Third, the flamethrower attack itself, targeting primary openings with sustained bursts. Fourth, immediate follow-up by riflemen to engage any defenders who attempted to escape the flames, but Japanese defenders were adapting. On the 8th day of the battle, Chen's team approached a bunker complex that appeared abandoned. The firing ports were silent. No return fire came despite Marines firing into the openings. Chen moved forward to his standard firing position, aimed at the main entrance, and squeezed his trigger. The stream of napalm shot forward, splashing against concrete, and then the bunker exploded. The Japanese had rigged it with demolitions, waiting for the flamethrower operator to get close, then detonating the charges remotely. The explosion killed Chen instantly and wounded 4 other Marines, including Williams. "They're learning," Morrison said quietly, looking at Chen's body. The young private who had saved so many lives was now a crumpled form in the volcanic sand. His flamethrower's fuel tank ruptured, its remaining contents spreading across the ground. They're targeting the flamethrower team specifically, setting traps for them. But even as Japanese tactics adapted, the psychological impact of the flamethrower continued to grow. Japanese officers reported increasing difficulty maintaining discipline in defensive positions, with soldiers asking to be assigned to forward positions where they could see the enemy approaching, rather than wait in sealed bunkers. Some units began leaving their fortifications at night, risking American patrols, simply to avoid the possibility of being trapped underground when the flamethrowers came. A Japanese diary found on a dead officer captured this fear. March 3, 1945. The Americans bring their fire weapons now to every attack. Men who have seen them describe liquid fire that flows like water, but burns like nothing in this world. It sticks to skin, to concrete, to everything. It cannot be extinguished. Today, Private Tanaka was burned when the Americans attacked our position. His screams continued for 2 hours before he died. The men are demoralized. Some speak of abandoning their positions rather than face the fire weapons. I have executed 2 for defeatism, but I understand their fear. I fear it too. By the battle's 3rd week, Marine tactics had evolved to maximize the psychological impact. Flamethrower teams would sometimes fire their weapons near Japanese positions without actually targeting them. The sight of burning napalm arcing through the air, the sound of the fuel igniting, the smell of burning petroleum would often cause defenders to panic and abandon positions that weren't even under direct attack. It's psychological warfare, explained Major Robert Dunlap, a battalion operations officer. The Japanese have been conditioned to fear the flamethrower above all other weapons. We're starting to use that fear tactically. Sometimes just the threat of a flamethrower attack is enough to make them break. But the weapon's effectiveness continued to make its operators priority targets. Of the 21 flamethrower operators who landed with the 23rd Marines on D-Day, 18 were casualties by the battle's end, killed, wounded, or psychologically unable to continue. The survival rate for flamethrower operators was lower than for any other infantry specialty, including machine gunners and radio operators who were also high-priority targets. Private Bobby Williams, recovered from his wounds, was issued a new flamethrower and assigned a new partner, Private Eddie Martinez from Los Angeles. On March 15th, 19 days after Chen had been killed, Williams found himself approaching another Japanese fortification, his flamethrower loaded, his hands steady despite everything he'd seen. "You scared?" Martinez asked him. "Every single time," Williams admitted. "But Chen taught me something before he died. He said the flamethrower isn't about killing Japanese. It's about saving Marines. Every time we burn out a position, that's Marines who don't have to assault it with rifles and grenades, who don't have to die taking that ground. We carry this weapon so our buddies don't have to." The fortification they approached was one of the last major Japanese strongpoints, a complex of interconnected bunkers built into the rocky terrain near the island's northern end. It had held up the Marine advance for 3 days, had killed over 40 Marines in failed assault attempts. Williams and Martinez were the 4th flamethrower team sent against it. "Cover fire," the company commander ordered, and 50 Marines opened up on the bunker complex. Williams and Martinez rushed forward, but this time they split up. A new tactic developed to improve survivability. If Japanese gunners targeted one flamethrower operator, the other might survive to complete the mission. Williams reached his firing position first, aimed at the main bunker entrance, and released a stream of burning napalm. The fire poured into the opening, and within seconds he heard screaming from inside, a sound that still haunted his dreams, but that he'd learned to accept as the price of victory. Martinez hit a secondary position, his stream of fire finding an air vent and pouring down into the bunker system below. But the Japanese had learned too. As Martinez fired, a hidden machine gun position opened up, one that hadn't revealed itself during the covering fire because they'd been waiting specifically for the flamethrower teams. Martinez was hit multiple times before he could react, collapsing with his flamethrower's trigger still pressed, the stream of fire now shooting wildly as he fell. Williams saw his partner go down and made a split-second decision that would earn him the Navy Cross. Rather than retreat to safety, he ran to Martinez's position, grabbed the fallen flamethrower, and directed its stream at the hidden machine gun position. The Japanese gunners had time for one burst before Williams's napalm reached them. Then their screams joined those coming from the main bunker. The fortification that had held for 3 days fell in 5 minutes, another victim of the weapon the Japanese had never fully prepared for. never developed adequate countermeasures against, never overcome psychologically despite their training and discipline. On March 26, 1945, 35 days after the Marines had landed on Iwo Jima, organized Japanese resistance officially ended. The cost had been staggering: 6,121 Americans killed and 19,217 wounded out of the 70,000 who landed. Japanese casualties were even higher, approximately 18,000 killed out of 21,000 defenders, with only about 200 taken prisoner despite American efforts to encourage surrender. Private Bobby Williams sat in a captured Japanese bunker, now serving as a temporary command post, filling out after-action reports for his flamethrower operations. The numbers told their own story. His team had been credited with destroying or neutralizing 47 Japanese fortifications during the battle. Conservative estimates suggested those 47 positions would have killed or wounded at least 300 Marines if they'd had to be taken by conventional assault. By that cold mathematics, Williams and his flamethrower had saved 300 American lives at the cost of killing approximately 600 Japanese soldiers in one of the most horrible ways to die. "Do you feel like a hero?" a correspondent asked him, one of several journalists now arriving to document the battle's aftermath. Williams thought carefully before answering. "I don't feel like a hero. I feel like I did my job. I carried that flamethrower because somebody had to, and because it saves Marines' lives. The Japanese built those fortifications to kill us. We had to get them out somehow. The flamethrower was the most effective way to do that. If that makes me a hero, then every guy who landed on this beach is a hero, because we all did what we had to do to win." What Williams didn't say, what he would never say publicly but would carry for the rest of his life, was that he was haunted by the screams of burning men, that he dreamed about faces he'd seen briefly in bunker openings before the fire reached them, that he sometimes woke up smelling petroleum and smoke that weren't there. The flamethrower had saved lives, but it had also cost him something of his humanity, forcing him to do things that civilian morality would condemn, but military necessity had demanded. The post-battle analysis by Marine Corps commanders confirmed what tactical experience had suggested. The flamethrower had been one of the most effective weapons deployed on Iwo Jima. Major General Graves Erskine, commanding the 3rd Marine Division, stated in his after-action report, "The flamethrower proved invaluable in reducing Japanese fortifications. No other infantry weapon was as effective against sealed pillboxes and bunkers." Japanese fear of flamethrowers affected their tactical decisions throughout the battle, often causing them to abandon otherwise strong positions or alter defensive plans to avoid flamethrower attack. But the report also acknowledged the cost. Flamethrower operators suffered casualty rates of approximately 85%, making this the most dangerous specialty in the infantry. Recommendation: increase training and number of flamethrower operators to ensure adequate replacements are available during extended operations. The Japanese assessment, compiled from interrogations of prisoners and captured documents, was even more revealing. A report found in General Kuribayashi's final headquarters, the general himself died in the battle's final days, described the flamethrower as the most feared American weapon, and acknowledged that defensive tactics based on sealed fortifications are ineffective when the enemy possesses practical flamethrower capabilities. One Japanese survivor, interviewed years after the war, described the psychological impact. "We were not afraid of American rifles or even their tanks. We had positions that could withstand anything but direct hits from the largest naval guns. But the flamethrowers, those were different. You couldn't defend against them. You couldn't shoot the fire. You couldn't dodge it. If the Americans brought flamethrowers to your position, you had two choices: abandon your position and be shot in the open, or stay and burn. Many men chose to be shot. It seemed cleaner, quicker." The technological development of flamethrowers continued after Iwo Jima. The M22 model used on that island was replaced by improved versions with longer range, more reliable ignition, and better fuel mixtures. But the basic tactical application, combined arms integration, suppressive fire, psychological impact, had been proven effective at Iwo Jima and would become standard doctrine for the rest of the Pacific War and beyond. The ethical questions raised by flamethrowers were debated even during the war. Some argued that burning enemy soldiers alive was unnecessarily cruel, that it violated the spirit, if not the letter of warfare conventions. Others countered that the flamethrower actually reduced overall casualties by making fortified positions untenable, thus shortening battles and saving lives on both sides. Captain Michael O'Sullivan, the chaplain who had counseled Chen and other flamethrower operators, wrestled with these questions throughout the battle and for years afterward. In a letter to his superior written after Iwo Jima, he wrote, "I cannot call the flamethrower a moral weapon, for no weapon of war is moral in any absolute sense. But I can say it is a necessary one, given the circumstances we face. The Japanese will not surrender, will not abandon their positions, will fight to the death in bunkers and caves that our other weapons cannot effectively attack. The flamethrower forces them to make a choice, surrender or die. That it often results in death is tragic, but the alternative, allowing those positions to continue killing Marines, is more tragic still. War is a series of terrible choices. The flamethrower is one of them." The Battle of Iwo Jima ended in March 1945, but the lessons learned there influenced military thinking for decades. The flamethrower had proven itself not just as a weapon, but as a tool that could break enemy morale, could make fortified positions psychologically untenable, could force tactical decisions based on fear rather than rational military calculation. Bobby Williams survived the war, returned home to Oklahoma, married, raised 3 children, and ran a hardware store until his retirement in 1985. He rarely spoke about his wartime service, and when he did, he never mentioned the flamethrower unless directly asked. His Navy Cross citation hung in a drawer, not on the wall. His children learned about his war record only when they were adults, reading through his military documents after his death in 2002. In his private papers, found after he died, was a journal he'd kept during his later years. One entry, dated February 19, 1995, the 50th anniversary of the Iwo Jima landing, captured his complex feelings about the weapon he'd carried. "Today marks 50 years since we landed on that island. I've thought a lot about the flamethrower over these decades, about what it meant, about what I did with it. I killed a lot of men in a horrible way. I don't apologize for it because I know it was necessary, know it saved Marines' lives, know that those Japanese soldiers would have killed us if they could. But I don't celebrate it either. The flamethrower was a terrible weapon that we used because the situation was terrible. I hope my grandchildren never have to face the kind of choices we faced, never have to use weapons like that, never have to understand why sometimes burning men alive is the least terrible option available." The M22 flamethrower and its successors continued in American military service through the Korean War and into Vietnam, proving effective in jungle warfare against fortified positions. But as warfare evolved and bunker-busting weapons became more sophisticated, the flamethrower gradually fell out of favor. Modern militaries have largely replaced it with thermobaric weapons and other munitions that achieve similar effects without requiring soldiers to close to within 40 yards of enemy positions. Yet the psychological lessons learned at Iwo Jima remain relevant. The flamethrower demonstrated that weapons can be effective not just through their direct physical effects, but through the fear they generate, the psychological impact they have on enemy soldiers. This understanding influences modern military, thinking about everything from precision-guided munitions to cyber warfare. The specific fortifications that Williams and other flamethrower operators destroyed on Iwo Jima still exist. Tourist destinations now, part of the island's memorial sites. Japanese and American veterans sometimes visit together, sharing memories, finding reconciliation. One Japanese veteran in a 2005 interview was asked about the flamethrowers. His response captured both the weapon's tactical impact and its human cost. "The Americans with the fire weapons were the bravest soldiers I encountered during the war. They carried tanks of fuel on their backs, making themselves targets, and they came so close to our positions that we could have thrown rocks at them. They did this knowing they would probably die. I hated them during the battle because they were so effective, because they made our positions useless. But I respect them now. They did what their country asked, just as we did. War made us enemies. Peace makes us remember that we were all just young men trying to survive." The flamethrower's legacy at Iwo Jima is complicated, as it should be. It was a weapon that saved American lives at the cost of killing Japanese soldiers in one of the most terrible ways imaginable. It was effective because it was horrible, psychological because it was visceral, successful because it exploited primal human fears. It represents both the ingenuity of military technology and the moral complexity of warfare, where the right tactical decision can involve using weapons that peacetime morality would condemn. The Japanese never saw it coming, not in the sense that they didn't know flamethrowers existed, but in that they never fully anticipated how effectively Americans would integrate this weapon into combined arms tactics, how thoroughly it would undermine their defensive strategy, how psychologically devastating it would prove to be. General Kuribayashi had planned for artillery, for naval gunfire, for airstrikes, for tanks. He had built fortifications that could withstand all of those, but he had not adequately planned for the psychological impact of liquid fire, for the way burning death would affect his soldiers' willingness to hold their positions, for the tactical implications of a weapon that made sealed bunkers into death traps. The weapon the Japanese never saw coming was not just a technological innovation, but a tactical evolution that changed how fortified positions were attacked and defended. It shortened the battle for Iwo Jima, saved American lives, and contributed to eventual Japanese surrender by demonstrating that even the most fanatical defense could be overcome. But it did all this through methods that remain morally troubling even 75 years later, through means that those who employed them still struggle to fully justify or forget. The flamethrowers of Iwo Jima stand as testament to the brutal pragmatism of war, where effectiveness trumps ethics, where necessity justifies horror, and where young men like Jimmy Chen and Bobby Williams are asked to carry weapons that will haunt them for the rest of their lives because those weapons are the difference between victory and defeat, between their survival and death. They did what was asked of them, what the situation demanded, what their training had prepared them for. And in doing so, they changed the nature of infantry warfare and ensured that the volcanic island of Iwo Jima would fall to American forces, no matter the cost in men, materiel, or conscience. The weapon the Japanese never saw coming was fire itself, not just as a destructive force, but as a psychological weapon that broke the will of defenders who had sworn to never surrender. And in the end, that psychological victory mattered as much as the tactical one, proving that in warfare, the weapon that creates the most fear can sometimes be more valuable than the weapon that creates the most destruction.